Hello friends, welcome on the platform of Spiritual Doctors for Holistic Health. हम यहाँ पर हर संडे आपके सामने एक मेडिकल डॉक्टर, एक एक्सपर्ट को लेकर आते हैं. Those who are working on spiritual dimension of health, holistic dimension of health. Last Sunday of the month, we tried to invite one global expert, and today we have one very unique person, a very unique case study जिस पर मैंने बहुत सारे सेशन में लेता रहता हूं कई सालों से. In the field of spirituality, there is one phenomena, near-death experience, NDE, that consciousness survives the death. Death is not the end of the story. We have many NDE cases, but one of the very unique cases is Dr. Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon, an American neurosurgeon, who has authored 3 books: Proof of Heaven, Map of Heaven, and Living in a Mindful Universe. If you will read properly this story is thrilling. Surviving from the coma itself is a rare phenomenon, and that too very good recovery in the mere 2 months. And the experience of the other side, it's so fabulous. Experience of 1 week of the other realm, and the other experience of the medical field, spiritual, scientific field of 5 decades. That experience of 7 days changed altogether the perception and the understanding. And now he is with us to educate, to enlighten, to empower about the role of consciousness in our life. We at the Spiritual Doctors for Holistic Health believe that if we can integrate awareness of consciousness in health dimension, managing the health, living a healthy life will be much easier. So I invite Dr. Eben Alexander. Thank you, sir. In Indian tradition, we do namaste. स्वागत है आपका. And you can start, sir. You can start your sharing.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Ranjan. I really appreciate this opportunity to share with your group. And I think it's a very important story overall, because there's a tremendous revolution going on in the scientific world about the very nature of consciousness. That is the relationship between the mind and the brain. This has everything to do with some of the deepest issues related to how we interpret reality and how we come to an understanding of it. And there is no question in my mind that healing, coming into wholeness, is certainly a gift that comes from this richer understanding. And so what I'll be doing for the next 40 or so minutes is discussing my own personal journey, a lot of how it dovetails with the revolution going on in science at large, and then talk about the tremendous implications this has for healing. And this is not just about concepts of allopathic healing, of holistic healing, but in many ways the power we have as beings coming into wholeness in this world to heal ourselves, because healing comes from, the word healing comes from the same root as the word wholeness. And really healing is just coming more into the soul we came here to be. One of the greatest gifts of my journey, as you will hear, was a deeper understanding of how the challenges and hardships in life, and that certainly includes illness and injury, in many ways are gifts, and they should be embraced, because what they do is they mark a pathway forward of transformation and understanding that helps us come into a more complete knowing of our relationship with the universe and really our purpose for being. And all of this is part of wholeness and healing. So to get right into my story, as you mentioned, Proof of Heaven, this was the original book about my story, and in many ways to me Proof of Heaven is more of a question mark than anything. It simply admits the reality of these experiences that millions of people have had over thousands of years across all belief systems and continents and ages. And it's really important to realize how they're coalescing into kind of a magnificent vision of our power to influence our emerging reality. Now, before my coma, I had been trained in conventional neuroscience. I was a neurosurgeon. I had taught more than 15 years at Harvard Medical School. Thought I understood something about brain, mind, and consciousness. But in November 2008, I had a major wake-up call. This came in the form of a severe, sudden case of a very deadly meningoencephalitis. In fact, the symptoms went from back pain and headache into deep coma and seizures over just a few hours, 2 hours or so at home in my bed. And my family was very alarmed by this, especially the seizures were unbreakable. I was already deep in coma with those seizures, not coming to any kind of awareness between them. And then I was rushed off to the Lynchburg General Hospital emergency room. And that's where I was intubated and put on a medical ICU on 3 very powerful intravenous antibiotics. And that's how I spent the next 7 days. There's some misunderstanding in the lay literature out there about my case that it was a medically induced coma. That was not true at all. And in fact, that's a very important point because it has everything to do with why the scientific community takes my case so seriously and sees the tremendous value in it for what it shows about consciousness being independent of the brain. And in my book, Proof of Heaven, I describe my journey, but I also have a lot of kind of scientific analysis of the medical facts of my case. And those were from the early days when I was just beginning to go through my medical records, trying to make sense of all this. But it didn't make sense. And the good news for people in the current era is that there were 3 doctors who wrote a case report on my medical records. That appeared in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in September 2018. It was a case report by Dr. Serbi Khanna and Lauren Moore and Bruce Grayson. And in that case report, they made it very clear how badly damaged my entire neocortex was from this, from the neurologic exams, my Glasgow coma scale for pretty much that entire week was around 6 or 7, which is well below the threshold of 9 for deep coma. And so, especially given the MRI and CT scans showing extensive damage to all 8 lobes of my brain, this is a tremendous challenge to modern neuroscience, which assumes that all of the details of conscious awareness of everything we perceive must be generated by portions of the neocortex. That's the most powerful calculator in the brain. And in fact, everything we see, hear, executive function, language, recall of memory, and planning for future anticipation of a future, every bit of that detail of conscious awareness is presumed to come from the neocortex. And yet my case was a perfect model of human death because of the extensive evidence of damage to my neocortex. And that's where the real value of the case is. In fact, the peer reviewers at the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, where that case was published in September 2018, the peer reviewers asked, how do you explain this case? It's absurd. It makes no sense. This kind of patient doesn't come back and recover completely. He was way too ill. Well, the answer from the 3 physicians who wrote up the case report is because he had a near-death experience, an NDE. That explains his profound and miraculous recovery. And the reason they said that is because they knew of other cases. For example, Anita Morjani, who wrote the book Dying to Be Me, and she had a very deep coma induced by a lymphoma that should have killed her within the next 12 hours. If you read her book, you'll understand much more about that. And yet she had a profound spiritual experience, came back to this world and knew her cancer would disappear. It did. Likewise, Dr. Mary C. Neal. She wrote a book called To Heaven and Back. And in that book, she describes her kayaking accident in southern Chile, in the late 1990s. She was an orthopedic surgeon, kayaking, and when her kayak went over the waterfall, the bow jammed into some rocks, her legs were broken, and she was underwater in a warm water drowning for more than 30 minutes. When they brought her to the surface, she was dead. She was resuscitated, and she had a profound NDE, and that, I believe, is what contributed to her miraculous healing. But any of us who are interested in healing should pay big attention to near-death experiences, because bundled along with the mysterious journeys they have that are very suggestive of a real realm, a spiritual realm that is our true home. In addition comes the power of that kind of touching of those realms and how it can heal us in this world. And I think there are lessons from that we'll talk about as we go through this that contribute to the healing available to all of us as we tap into our spiritual nature, into that oneness of mind. Now, getting back to my own journey, the important thing to point out is I was amnesic. I had no memory whatsoever of Eben Alexander's life when I went through my spiritual experience in coma. Initially, I explained that because I reverted to my default position that the brain stores memory and is the repository of consciousness. And therefore, I thought, well, if my neocortex was so completely inactivated, then also my memories would be expected to disappear. But I didn't know yet how my memories would come back completely. In fact, over 2 months, all of my memories returned. And in fact, many of them, I came to realize in close conversations with family and friends, were more detailed than they had been before my coma. And we talk about this a lot in our third book. And this is the true proof of heaven, is living in a mindful universe that was co-written with my life partner, Karen Newell. And this is where we go into the science. This book came out in 2017. It's endorsed by many leading scientists around the world who study consciousness. But in that book, we go into great detail about kind of dissecting the brain-mind connection and the nature of reality, talking about the importance of quantum physics and coming to a deeper understanding, talk a lot about healing, but also especially about the reality of the mental realm, of the spiritual realm, and how by accessing it through prayer and meditation, we can all come into much greater control of our healing. But the other points we make in that book is we point out how consciousness is not produced by the brain at all, and memory is not stored in the brain. That's one of the last nails in the coffin of materialist neuroscience, but it really helps us to get to a whole new level of understanding about our will and its ability to influence our lives. So in my coma experience, my memories were gone. I had no language, no memories of Earth or this universe, and that empty slate was a very important part of my journey. My journey began in what I call the earthworm's eye view, a very primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm. It's like being in dirty jello. It seemed to go forever, but it didn't. I was rescued by a slowly spinning white light. It came packaged with a perfect musical melody. And that white light served as a portal up into this rich, ultra-real gateway valley that was filled with many Earth-like features. For example, I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. There were millions of other butterflies looping and spiraling in vast formations above this absolutely perfect, ideal meadow. One of the things about that gateway valley, as I called it, is that it was much more real than this world. People have this misinterpretation. They think that near-death experiences must be dreamy and kind of dreamlike and murky. In fact, they are much more real than this living in the material world. In fact, it's in many ways like drinking consciousness from a fire hose, because there are no longer the intervening filters of our eyes, our ears, the filtering mechanisms of the brain. We actually come into full exposure with consciousness in a big way, much more involved with higher soul and with the connectedness and kind of primordial mind. So that is why these NDEs and similar spiritually transformative experiences are so often described as ineffable, beyond words, indescribable. You know, our language is quite good at describing a trip to Disney World, but it fails miserably at describing these kind of journeys. And part of the reason is our modes of knowing are so much more enhanced. In that gateway valley, there would be knowledge through identification. I would become swathes of the scene around me as part of the lessons and learning about it. And a beautiful example of that is how many people who have had NDEs, more than half of them, will describe what's called a life review. And the life review is a very important concept. Life reviews go back at least 2,400 years. Plato wrote about the NDE of an Armenian soldier named who was killed in battle. And after several days on the battlefield, he was put on a funeral pyre, but just before they lit it up, he woke up, and boy did he have a story to tell. But in short, that story could have come from any soldier today on a battlefield. And the story he told was that when you die, your life flashes before your eyes, you relive all the crucial lessons, but importantly, you see it from the perspective of others, the emotional power of those around you. So if you've been busy handing out pain and suffering to others, you have to be on the receiving end of that. In fact, I would say that, although hellish or negative NDEs only happen about 3 to 5% of all NDEs, I would say that some of those that I've heard are really just a life review where someone had to be on the receiving end of what they had handed out to others through much of that time. So the life review is a beautiful example of how the boundaries of self in many ways are artificial. And this is something Karen and I often teach in meditation, is traversing through that veil of consciousness and getting to that position of oneness of mind that we all share. Because NDEs show us that we're truly in this together. The life review, that reliving of the major teaching points of your life that might still have value for learning and teaching, is a beautiful lesson of the golden rule being written into the very fabric of the universe. The golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated. And this is exactly what that life review shows us. And it's a reason why NDEers come back to this world very much in love with love. They felt unconditional love. They know the power it has to heal. And I think one cannot ignore that force of unconditional love if one wants to talk about coming into wholeness and healing. And so that golden rule is right there in the life reviews through all belief systems that have happened across continents around the world for thousands of years. NDEs are a very important part of understanding our deeper nature. But in and of themselves, NDEs will not ultimately take us all the way, because those people didn't die. They might have had miraculous healing. There certainly are lessons there. But you really have to dig deeper to get to the full picture here. And we'll get into that shortly. The other thing to mention, though, before I leave my journey behind, because I'm not going to discuss my personal journey. That's all covered very well in Proof of Heaven and also in many YouTube videos I've given that are available across the world. But the other thing to mention is, from that beautiful gateway valley, that world of ideals, I ascended to higher and higher levels. Again, it was through music, vibration, frequency. And of course, I'm sure you realize that on those journeys, in those realms, you were no longer limited to hearing sounds that would come in through ears, or seeing things that would come in through eyes. This mode of knowledge through identification, of becoming major parts of what the universe is trying to show us, is the main way we come to an understanding on these journeys. And in my journey, that gateway valley was just a gateway, because the angelic choirs above that were emanating chants and anthems and hymns that would thunder through me, those provided yet another portal, like a wormhole up into a higher and higher level. I remember seeing all of four-dimensional space-time collapsing down, all of what I call deep time, which is a different ordering of causality. The deep time is the way you would measure, for example, a soul's progression through multiple lifetimes, or the evolution of all consciousness, which I believe is the reason this universe exists. That is what I saw collapsing down until I got to the core. The core was infinite inky blackness, but filled to overflowing with the divine and healing love of that God force. And in fact, when I came back to this world, God was a puny little human word with a lot of baggage. And I realized it didn't matter if people were talking about God or Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit. It doesn't matter, because essentially they are all the one force of love, connection, kindness, compassion, and mercy at the creative source of the universe, really at the source of all of our awareness. And this is why in meditation and centering prayer, we can all come to know these truths. You don't have to have an NDE to know all that I know and more about our relationship. Explore for yourself, going deeply within mind. Once you realize that the brain is not the creator of mind, but only a filter that allows in primordial consciousness, then you start to see the tremendous power we have when we identify with our higher soul. In meditation, that higher soul is intimately connected with all other higher souls and sentience throughout the cosmos. So in that core realm, as I called it, I was taught many things. And I would oscillate. I would fall back down to that earthworm eye view. And it was by using the memory of the musical notes that I could conjure up these portals to travel between the realms. And to me, it's very interesting that sound was so important to me in this journey. In fact, I called that God force Om, because that was the sound I heard in the core realm, the deepest sanctum sanctorum of the divine. And Om was the kind of resonance in an infinite dimensional space given all of eternity to resonate in, because that core realm was completely beyond all space and time at the creative essence. And that's something that I've come to facilitate in my meditations, is that connection with that oneness. In fact, you were showing, Dr. Ranjan, in your opening slide, Dr. Larry Dossey, who's one of the big endorsers of our work, and you were showing The One Mind. And One Mind is a book I highly recommend to people. It really makes it clear how we're dealing with one sentience that we share. And of course, this goes far beyond humans, involves animals, plant life. This really is a one mind that includes all sentience throughout the cosmos. But coming back to this world, when I first woke up on day 7, my brain was so wrecked by the experience, I did not even recognize my loved ones at the bedside. My sisters, my mother, my sons. I had no idea who these beings were. And that was a deep mystery. I mean, luckily my language came back literally over hours. My memories, as I said, family memories, things like that, returning over hours and days, and then all my semantic knowledge of neuroscience, cosmology, etc., returning over about 2 months. But then I was left with this gigantic mystery. And of course, I report a lot of that in Proof of Heaven, and the book Proof of Heaven ends 4 months after my coma, when I had a profound realization about that guardian angel that I had witnessed on the butterfly wing, my spiritual companion, who was there every time I passed through that realm. And I'm not going to go into that now. People who read the book will know how powerful that lesson was. 4 months after my coma, when I received a picture in the mail of a biological sister who I'd never known because I was adopted, and realized she had been that guardian angel. It's a profound moment in my life. I was absolutely shocked into the realization of my experience. And that's when the true journey began, because then as a scientist, it was up to me to try and decipher all this and start to make some sense of it. And there are many sides of that we talk about in Living in a Mindful Universe, but I'd like to cut right to the chase now and start talking about the various aspects of the scientific community and the modern discussion of consciousness that are so important. And I think the place to start is not just neuroscience and philosophy of mind, but really quantum physics. And if you go back a century and look at the discussions with Niels Bohr and Einstein and others, trying to make sense of the experiments in quantum physics, what all of them remarked on is how consciousness seemed to be fundamental. And, Werner Heisenberg, Wolfgang Pauli, many of them, Pascual Jordan, all of them were observing how the experiments looking at subatomic matter, electrons, photons, atoms and molecules, when you get down to that level, what you find is they don't behave at all like things in this bigger world. And in fact, what you can demonstrate quite readily is that the mind of the observer is a very important thing. It cannot be seen to be derivative from physical matter. When you get into deep discussions of free will and consciousness and the power of mind, for example, all of the examples of non-local consciousness that are well studied scientifically in what's been known as parapsychology. But the reality is these are real effects, and they happen in normal people all the time. Things like telepathy, things like precognition, knowing the future, presentiment, where, for example, Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, another supporter of our work, has shown how your autonomic nervous system can anticipate a computer image, whether it be kind of graphically horrific, neutral, or comforting, that you know that before the computer has even selected the image. I mean, when you get into the science of this, it's absolutely fascinating. But our materialist models of brain creates consciousness and our typical understanding of how that works are false. And that's why this bigger understanding of consciousness is so important. I love how John Wheeler, the renowned quantum physicist, the head of physics at Princeton University in the mid 20th century, John Wheeler came up with what he called the participatory anthropic principle. And in that, he was discussing some very deep kind of experimental results that had to do with cosmology. Photons coming from a distant galaxy or a distant quasar using an intervening galaxy as a gravitational lens, and how those particles might behave as waves or particles, those photons. And what he showed very clearly with his principle is that the photon really has no such identity until it is observed by a sentient being. That is very important. What they're all talking about is the reality of idealism. At a very fundamental level, our universe is one that works from a mental and spiritual level, not from a material level. And for example, Wheeler referred to George Berkeley, an Irish theologian who had lived 2 centuries earlier. And Wheeler said, as Berkeley has said, to be is to be perceived. And this is one of the deepest and most profound lessons of the modern science of consciousness, is as much as our brain and mind fool us into believing there is a world out there, a physical world, you should never forget that what Karen and I refer to in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, the supreme illusion, which is that all of it is really, what you're witnessing is a mental construct within mind. That is absolutely crucial, and that's what gives us so much power over that emerging world out there, is that it's actually nothing more than a mental model. There's a beautiful essay in the scientific journal Nature in 2005. It was by Richard Kahn Henry, and he was the head he was a physicist at Johns Hopkins. And that one-page essay is entitled Mental Universe. You can go to my reading list on ebenalexander.com, recommended reading, to find that and more than 100 other papers and resources about all of this. So that's where you would find it. But in that essay, he makes it very clear that modern quantum physics is painting a picture of a mental universe where all the physical is simply emergent from the mental. And this is exactly what Wheeler was saying at that time. Although I would make the differentiation, George Berkeley's philosophy of idealism in many ways was a solipsism, where basically he was saying you can only know that what's in your mind exists. You can't really know that anything outside exists, including other minds that seem to be there. But our version of idealism, which is supported in the modern era by what I would say is the best interpretation of the measurement paradox in quantum physics, which is that of Carlo Rovelli, the relational quantum physics interpretation. A very simple, bare bones version of that measurement paradox, and combine that with the writings of Bernardo Kastrup, with a K. He's another scientific supporter of our work. Bernardo endorsed our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, but Bernardo has done tremendous work on his own. Recently wrote a book called The Idea of the World. And if you tie Carlo Rovelli's physics with Kastrup's metaphysics, I think you start to see exactly where we're going with objective idealism in our book. And all of it is really an importance of understanding how that one mind is truly where everything emerges in this universe. And that we have access to that mental layer. That's where prayer and meditation are so important, but just by being sentient beings. This is how we can influence our unfolding reality. We talk about the primordial mind hypothesis in our book, and that, of course, is where a lot of this is going. So it's really about mind over matter. And, you know, doctors have admitted to the power of mind over matter for at least 60 or 70 years through using the placebo-controlled trial. Placebo effect. Ask Big Pharma if it's real. To them, it's a nightmare because placebo effect, kind of in a general description, gives you about a 30% benefit just based on the beliefs, attitudes, and thoughts of the patient and of the physician, of the healer, whatever healthcare worker that may be. Their beliefs influence tremendously the outcome of what, ends up happening. Placebo effect is very powerful. And as more and more people start to understand its power, they also start to realize how they have power on their own health. And I'm not just talking about a sugar pill fixing a headache. If you go to noetic.org, that's the Institute of Noetic Sciences website, and that's where Dean Radin works and other very capable scientists and investigators. And if you put in the search term on that website, spontaneous remission, you'll get to an annotated bibliography that was assembled by 1993 by Carol Hirschberg and Brendan O'Regan of more than 3,500 cases of healing in people with cancer, advanced cancer, infections, even some congenital anomalies, things like that. 3,500 cases of really what would be labeled miraculous healing, because these were healings that went far beyond any medical intervention they had. And if you go to the website, you'll find that whole book is available for free as PDF downloads of the chapters. It's out of print, but the good news is Helene Wabe, who works now at IONS, at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, is redoing that database with 35 more years of data. 26 more years of data beyond that original report. And that should be very exciting indeed. Now, there's also a beautiful book that was written about the cancer cases in particular from that database. That book is called Radical Remission, came out in 2015 by Dr. Kelly A. Turner. And in that, she studied more than 1,000 cases of cancer remission from that IONS database. And she basically identified 9 factors that she felt were especially important in the lives of people who were able to successfully heal their illnesses beyond anything that they had been accomplished from medical intervention. And 6 of those factors are things that we could easily label as spiritual. Things like following one's intuition, releasing suppressed emotions, increasing positive emotions, embracing social support, broadening your social network, and your sense of love and loving connections with others, a deepening spiritual connection, as well as having a strong reason for living. These were all crucial factors that Kelly Turner identified in her study of that IANDS database. And for more information on that, you can go to radicalremission.com. And she's been collecting a lot of additional cases, so there's much there. And of course, you can leave your own case. But I think, healing is something that is very much in the hands of those who have the illness. We're not trained to believe that in our modern world. We're taught to believe, that it all comes through the doctors and nurses. But in fact, and doctors and nurses obviously do a lot of tremendous good in this world. And there's a tremendous value that's come from our modern medical interventions. But I think ultimately what you find, especially when you read these kind of cases and come to this deeper understanding, is that a tremendous amount of healing has to do with the thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs of those who are participating in the healing process, patient as well as the treating practitioner. So I've already mentioned the miraculous nature of healing in some NDEs, so that again just emphasizes the power of being aware of these cases, understanding how some people have very successfully made this connection that has helped them. And I think at this point I'd like to change the discussion very slightly, and I want to talk a bit more about meditation, but I want to do it in the setting of some of the scientific work that's been done recently on what are known as entheogens. In the olden days, people might have called them psychedelics or hallucinogens. Hallucinogen is a terrible word. That is wrong. I'm talking about certain plant substances like psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and in some of the papers I'll discuss also LSD, DMT, dimethyltryptamine, the active principle in ayahuasca. But the reason I mention them is that there have been recent studies, notably with psilocybin, in treating, for example, a debilitating fear of death in cancer patients, or severe addictions, alcoholism, opiate addictions, nicotine, which is one of the worst physiologic addictions. And in fact, what you find is these papers report, and they've come out of NYU and Johns Hopkins, places like that, and what they report, though, is that with 1 or 2 or maybe 3 doses, given in a proper therapeutic setting, that people have long-lived, months, years of cure from that fear of death, from the severe addictions. And what I would argue is you're not using these like we normally use medications on a regular basis. You're using them as a catalyst to thin the veil, to get in touch with higher soul. And I do not recommend the casual use of these substances for any kind of spiritual work or understanding. I think you can actually get much more benefit from meditation. And I'll talk in just a minute about sacred acoustics, which is the form of meditation I use and have used daily for more than 10 years now. But in these scientific papers that have come out looking at this healing, I believe that what's happening is that connection that these drugs facilitate with higher soul is what enables us to bring that healing into our lives. And that is easily something we can accomplish through meditation. In fact, an excellent book that supports the use of binaural beat brainwave entrainment meditation, such as sacred acoustics, is a book called Dark Night, Early Dawn. It was by Christopher Bache, B-A-C-H-E, written about 20 years ago. And that book, he had used high-dose LSD for spiritual investigation. And what he found was that binaural beat sounds, just listening to sounds through headphones, with a dedicated program gave him as much benefit as the high-dose psychedelics. That's very important, or entheogens. And what I would say is this opens the door to the kind of healing we can gain through meditation. The other important thing to mention about entheogens in this context, again, things like psilocybin, magic mushrooms, LSD, DMT, is that the scientific papers that have investigated the brains of people under the influence of those substances actually shows that the brain goes dark. There's absolutely no region of neural activity, of neurons, of brain cells that we, have surmised are crucial to thoughts and to conscious processes. They all go dark. They disappear. In fact, when the first such paper came out from Imperial College in London back in 2012, it's in the Bibliography of Proof of Heaven. That paper was by Robin Carhart Harris. And it was so shocking to the kind of materialist neuroscience community that Christoph Koch, who was the head of the Paul Allen Neuroscience Research Center, or was at that time in Seattle, wrote an essay in Scientific American of how shocked he was that these investigations using functional MRI, using magnetoencephalography, very good techniques for identifying neural activity, found the brain going dark when people had the most phenomenally amazing experiences of their entire life. To me, that was entirely reminiscent of the experience I had deep in coma when my neocortex was so demonstrably turned off. I mean, as the case reviewers of my medical records came to the same conclusion, my brain was in no shape to create any kind of phenomenal experience, much less the most profound, memorable, detailed, vivid. I remember it today as if it happened this morning. How can that be when all of my neocortex was off? Well, these scientific papers using entheogens show you very clearly we need to move beyond the model of believing that the brain creates consciousness and it's neuronal activity that gives us the results of consciousness. In many ways, the brain interferes. We are conscious in spite of our brain. So this is why meditation and centering prayer are very valuable, because they allow us to go beyond the veiling function. Now, I want to mention briefly, because I'm coming to the end of my prepared notes here, but I would like to talk briefly about the binaural beat brainwave entrainment. We talk about it a lot in Living in a Mindful Universe, so you can go there for some good resource of understanding it. But essentially, binaural beats were a phenomenon that was discovered by a Prussian physicist back in the late 1800s. His name was Wilhelm Heinrich Dove, and he just noted that a pure tone in one ear, he was using things like tuning forks, a slightly different frequency, say 100 hertz, 100 cycles per second in one ear, and by example 104 hertz, 100 in the other ear. Somewhere in the brain as a 4 hertz signal gets generated. It's the arithmetic difference between the two input signals. And then in the late 20th century, various investigators found that binaural beats seem to engender transcendental states of conscious awareness. And they were used, for example, in out-of-body experiences and also in remote viewing. Remote viewing is, you might have heard of psychic spy programs, this kind of thing, but remote viewing is scientifically very well validated as a mode of accessing information across space and time, just using mental exploration. It's very, very kind of powerful kind of scientific support to it. But the important thing is that binaural beats seem to enhance people's ability to get in those states. There had been an article back in the early 1970s in Scientific American by someone named Oster, O-S-T-E-R, and that was all about binaural beats and kind of their ability to influence conscious processes and all that, although he didn't go deep into kind of the spiritual nature of it. But many people have in kind of the recent years. That's where Living in a Mindful Universe comes in very handy to kind of consolidate a lot of that information. I use Sacred Acoustics, and you can learn a lot more about this by going to sacredacoustics.com. In just a few minutes, we're going to have a 10-minute Om meditation using Sacred Acoustics. Problem, of course, with the internet is I don't guarantee anything about the quality of sound that you might get on this internet platform. But what I would encourage you to do is visit sacredacoustics.com, where Karen Newell, my life partner and co-author of the book Living in a Mindful Universe, she's the co-founder of Sacred Acoustics. And she has provided on her website a free 20-minute Om file for people to download and test. They're more effective through headphones or earbuds They do work through speakers, especially in large groups, and we've done group meditations because of the group energy. But if you're on your own, it's best to try them through headphones or earbuds, because that way you get the purest signal differentiation between the two ears. And what I would say is going on here, we don't know with any kind of certainty, but I think the reason these sounds have such a powerful effect is in contradistinction to every sound you've ever heard, and that would include chants and anthems and hymns that might have induced a profound state of conscious awareness. Those sounds were all processed up in the neocortex, in the acoustic cortex of the temporal lobes, in circuits that basically have been evolved and modified in the last few million years in primates and in Homo sapiens. Very, very different, these binaural beats that are processed in circuits right at the origin, down in the lower brainstem, circuits that arose more than 300 million years ago. In evolutionary biology, there's a general principle. If you want to understand a function, for example, consciousness, and if you want to look at it, you know, the physical world and how it relates to, we look at our brain, and you look back through the evolution of the brain and its circuits, and that's where you start to get some answers. So by affecting a circuit in the lower brainstem that evolved before mammals even walked the earth, I believe that's one of the reasons why people who learn to just ride these tones have found tremendous benefit. And if you go to the testimonials page on Sacred Acoustics, you'll find a lot of those testimonials. But we've also been blessed with a pilot study in the peer-reviewed medical literature. This was by Dr. Anna Yusim, Y-U-S-I-M. It was published in February of 2020 in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases. And in that pilot study, Dr. Yusim used what was called the Whole Mind Bundle, which is available on Sacred Acoustics website. That Whole Mind Bundle, she found in her busy Manhattan psychiatric practice to be very effective at alleviating symptoms of anxiety in 26% of her patients over 2 weeks, compared to 7% of patients who just received the standard talk psychotherapy. That's a tremendous benefit that was added by 2 weeks of listening to binaural beat brainwave entrainment. Now, because of the pandemic, Karen knew that these tones were very important to help heal this world. Lots of anxiety, lots of bereavement, people losing loved ones. I mean, tremendous stresses, economic, of COVID pandemic. And so what Karen did was make that Whole Mind Bundle available. She discounted it deeply on the Sacred Acoustics website, but acknowledging the financial hardship of so many in this world and the necessity to get this kind of thing out there, she also offers Whole Mind Bundle for free. So if for those who cannot have the financial fortitude to help them, I think it's $19 was her discounted price. But it's a gift to the world from Sacred Acoustics to help people overcome this. So that very same set of tones in the Whole Mind Bundle that was used in Dr. Yusim's pilot study is available globally from Sacred Acoustics with Karen's best wishes for healing and for love. I think what I'd like to do now is just kind of close by saying that the near-death experience is just the beginning. There are also shared death experiences which happen in normal people. They can happen to somebody 1,000 miles away. They're normally of a loved one who is leaving the physical world, and their soul can come right through and take you along on the journey. So NDEs, shared death, these are not hallucinations. And then when you build into it the tremendous literature on reincarnation, this is not about anyone's religious beliefs. I'm talking about the scientific work available. If you go to University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, uvadops.org, you can learn a tremendous amount more about all manner of consciousness. It expands greatly on a lot of what we present in Living in a Mindful Universe. And it's understanding that much bigger picture. For example, the reincarnation stories at UVA, they now have more than 2,500 cases of past life memories in children indicative of reincarnation, where deep study of the details has provided evidence of the reality of these experiences. So anyone in the modern era who is claiming to understand anything about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the relationship of mind and brain needs to fully dive into all of this work that we're describing. Living in a Mindful Universe is a great place to start. For those who want to get deeply into kind of the scientific side of this, that UVA group, Dr. Ed Kelly in particular, this is the third book of a trilogy that he has written. You can see on the bottom of the cover there how I endorsed it very strongly. It's endorsed by many other scientific investigators of consciousness. But this is really about a revolution that's absolutely ongoing in this world today, and every bit of it comes back to the power of our free will to bring healing through the forces of love, kindness, and compassion into our lives. I think with that, now what I'd like to do, we have about 30 more minutes. We can certainly have some discussion. And I'd certainly love to hear from anyone about their experience, if they felt
I'd like to make a sharing with you. So we actually had 2 meetings on PMC Gujarat. It's a YouTube channel where Dr. S. Ranjan spoke about you, and hundreds and hundreds of people were very curious to know about you. So they have joined, and we are still having this relaying on the PMC Gujarat channel. It was so nice to learn about your near-death experience, sir, and the confidence and the way the things have been. It's a marvelous thing. It has made the people get clarity on how the conscious, it still remains once we think as we leave the body, the conscious is still there and everything is going on. It is a marvelous thing that you have explored and you have given to the people as such. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you so much for a wonderful sharing today too. Thanks a lot.
well, thank you very much for that. And it's a pleasure. I can tell you the biggest gift to me has been by sharing my story and going public globally about this. Other people share their stories with me. And this is an incredible gift. It just affirms and kind of helps strengthen my understanding of this. So thank you for your kind words.
And I would also like to thank Dr. Ranjan for taking up your story, Dr. Eben. It was so well explained by him. Thanks a lot, Dr. Ranjan.
Yes.
Dr. Eben, Dr. Sandeep Jyot here. I am also staying in the state of Gujarat. And this was really when I was telling the story, because we have read your book, but listening you one by one, that was a great experience. I was having a goosebumps, like listening to your story, that we can imagine, visualize a story, that what happened, is it possible? Because someone is saying in the book is like, yes, we trust. But today, after reading so much, that yes, this thing, healing part, the healing modalities, right now everyone can have meditation with them. They can experience the meditation and they can heal anything they have. Dr. Alexander, I want to tell you that I am also a doctor and sound healer also. In the sound with the Tibetan singing bowls, we produce binaural harmonics. With that also we have a lot of case studies that after the session, people share the experience, the out of body experience. They have seen this, they have gone to their past life. Yes, these things are real, Dr. Alexander, and today's session was really, really great.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And it has everything to do with healing. That's why I think this is so important. I mean, fundamentally, this notion of kind of enhanced free will by connecting with our higher soul is all about becoming more whole, more of the soul we came here to be. And that's why I often say that illness and injury in many ways are gifts. They are the stepping stones that mark a pathway forward. And it's how we respond to those challenges that enables our souls to truly grow into who we came here to be. And that ultimately is hinged in a deep sense of reacquiring love, of realizing the love of the universe for self, and then serving as a conduit for that love by manifesting unconditional love, kindness, compassion to all of our fellow beings. So all of this is about healing. Thank you very much for your comments.
The best part, personally, I liked was that after the near-death experience, that was the love for the love. And right now, what we have listened is totally out of love, whatever you have given us today. And if you will be present in person, we must have hugged you if you present right now.
Absolutely. So we're all connected in that spiritual realm, and that's where the power of our kind of group energy, humanity, can come to world peace. We can obliterate warfare and violent conflict, but it just takes more and more of us being aware of this deep connection and showing acts of love and kindness and compassion, when necessary, forgiveness. These are tremendous tools, and of course, never forget gratitude. Since coming back from my coma, every breath is a tremendous gift for which I am eternally grateful. And that kind of gratitude combined with forgiveness of self and others gives us tremendous power to kind of strengthen our soul connection and our identity with the universe.
Dr. Eben, I have one question.
Yes.
You mentioned that after returning from the coma, you have even the better memory than earlier.
I'm sorry, the what?
After returning from the coma, you have even the better memory than earlier. So, means memory of the physical life of your this physical realm.
Yes.
So, means how that is happening?
You mean, I'm sorry, how about the memory?
Yeah.
That after near-death experience, you have the profound memories of physical world. Your memory has been has been improved after that incident. What is the
It's because
explanation for that?
it's because memory is not stored in the brain at all, and that's that's, as I said, that's the last nail in the coffin of materialist neuroscience. We've been looking for memory in the brain for more than a century. Neurosurgeons have noted that in spite of the million-plus brain resections we've done over the last century around the globe, there has never been a case of any brain resection where there was an identifiable deletion of a swathe of long-term memories. Now, back in the early 1950s, neurosurgeons learned that if you have damage to the medial temporal lobes, to the hippocampus, parts of the limbic system, that you can greatly interfere with the conversion of short-term to long-term memories. But that's not the same as finding a site where memories are stored in the brain. And in fact, when you review the very strong reincarnation literature that has been studied by cognitive scientists and the excellent scientists at the University of Virginia, as I said, more than 2,500 cases, you start to realize, of course, memories are not stored in the brain. The brain is a filter. It allows us to access consciousness and access memory, but it is not ultimately where those things reside. That's called the production model of consciousness among neuroscientists, that the brain produces consciousness. And yet all the evidence really looks at the brain as a filter. The filter theory is one that, to my knowledge, was really first seriously considered in the late 1800s. Dr. William James, who was the head of psychology at Harvard and in many ways the father of modern American psychology, he frequently would discuss filter or transmission theory. He called it a reducing valve, because at that time, just as people often mistakenly call the brain a computer, well, back in those days, the big technology was steam engines. So he called it a reducing valve that reduced, the steam pressure, but it reduced that primordial consciousness. But F.C.S. Schiller, Henri Bergson in France, Aldous Huxley in the United States. All of these prominent thinkers talked about filter theory, the brain as a filter of consciousness, but not the producer of it. And especially in our modern era of coming to a deeper understanding of the kind of mental and spiritual layer of the universe, we come, and idealism, objective idealism, which is, of course, the position we support in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, and that Bernardo Kastrup supports in his book, The Idea of the World. We're really kind of using that filter theory in a very kind of modern fashion to come to a deeper understanding of it. From my point of view as a neuroscientist, the interesting thing is trying to really derive how all those ion channels and synaptic clefts in the brain, how they have any kind of relation to presenting us with this mental model that ultimately is a determinant of how the universe unfolds. The thing I didn't really get to in my talk was how in modern quantum physics, you can either subscribe to well, it's all just the subatomic particles going by the laws of physics that give us this world that emerges. And in fact, the hardcore materialist neuroscientist who subscribes to that would tell you we don't even have free will, because they would say if it's all just chemical reactions and electron fluxes, how do you possibly inject free will into that system? And what they're missing is that it's primarily that mental universe, and the mental uses the physical, and it's something that kind of starts with the brain, but not in our normal sense of causality. But we really have to dig deeper to get the whole big picture of how it works. But the mental ordering is very important. And in quantum physics, for example, you can read the writings of George F.R. Ellis, who is a South African mathematician who has written extensively about top-down causality in quantum systems. And you've probably heard of the Hugh Everett's many worlds interpretation of the measurement paradox in quantum physics. And in fact, a majority of physicists believe that that might be the proper interpretation, but what that invokes is infinite parallel universes, one unfolding in every branch point of an observation by a sentient being. That doesn't seem to be the world we live in, and yet some physicists pursue that many worlds interpretation to the nth degree. And what they've missed is, as John Wheeler tried to point out, to be is to be perceived. We live in a mental universe, and it is top down. And Karen often helps encourage me to realize that no, it's ultimately that spiritual universe, because our mental is just a way of connecting to that deeper spiritual richness. In essence, it's all just using our definitions to try and break the world apart, and we lose the kind of uniform flow of it all, which we can regain through meditation. That's why I often feel that the best way to express all this is not just to give these ideas for people to cogitate over in their linguistic, ego-centered brain, but to help them meditate to get in and find the answers for themselves.
Dr. Eben, your every word is like a gold for us. I have few questions. You can say that kind of rapid fire kind of thing. My first question is that you have told us about so many books, so many studies, that the passion for reading the books, it started after this incident, or before that also you were reading all these kind of books out of syllabus which are not part of our medical school?
Well, I had always had an interest in cosmology. I knew quantum physics was kind of fascinating, but I really had no clue of the deep connection of quantum physics and the lesson it's giving us about the mind and the brain. But I had a lot, all the way back to my childhood. In fact, in college, I was considering going into astrophysics. So I've definitely had an interest in this kind of thing. But consciousness itself was not the focus, oddly enough, or the deep understanding of consciousness. I had read Roger Penrose's book, The Emperor's New Mind, back in 1989 when it first came out. And to me, that was kind of a fascinating, eye-opening vision. Roger Penrose is a brilliant physicist. He's recently worked with an anesthesiologist, Stuart Hameroff, who I know. and they have done work in what's called orchestrated ORs, their kind of interpretation of the measurement paradox, looking at preservation of quantum information in microtubules of the brain. I think they're onto something really big, but ultimately Penrose then tries to tie all that, as we discuss in Living in a Mindful Universe, to collapse that has to do with passing a threshold in gravity. But I think the ultimate answer is a lot deeper about understanding the mental layer of the universe. But answering your question of even something like the hard problem of consciousness, which is one of the most profound challenges to materialist science when it comes to brain and mind and understanding the brain, I really wasn't very aware of the literature around that until after my coma. And in the first few years, I read more than 150 books, scientific books, a lot of other NDEs, spiritual experiences, went back and read some of the ancient literature on this. I was trying to look at it from all angles. And to me, the fascinating thing was finding that some of the deepest truths that I think modern science and cosmology, neuroscience, brain and mind, coming to a deeper understanding, some of those deepest truths in many ways have been known to spiritual traditions going back thousands of years. And of course, I'm not giving any news to people in India about this. You all have been richly, deeply, knowingly involved in this kind of profound truth of consciousness for millennia. And I think just now we're kind of catching up. And in many ways, it's a good thing because it supports the deep spiritual nature. This kind of work, especially when you focus on NDEs, supports the absolute crucial nature of love and kindness and compassion in living our lives. And I would say that's really the most important lesson that comes out of NDEs, not what happens when we die. Because I think all of us can come to a deeper knowing of that if we practice meditation and go through a lot of this transformation that we talk about in our books. But ultimately, the true value of this discussion and this awakening that's very supported by modern emerging science is of how to live our lives every day, how to make choices about how we see ourselves and our relationship with the universe, and not only that, but how we see our relationship with our fellow beings. And I believe that ultimately is going to influence a lot of the way that we treat animals, for example, because we call ourselves Homo sapiens. Sapiens means wise, but much of what I see in the damage to the world, the climate change, the addiction to fossil fuels, the pollution, warfare, conflict, all of that, also kind of bundles into that how we treat each other and animals, and it's got to change for the better because we're truly spiritual beings in a spiritual universe, and this scientifically valid revolution will help us all come to a deeper understanding. And that is a tremendous gift that I think we all can share.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander. These were really, really wonderful. That one last question kind of thing. Already you told that we should follow compassion, love. You're doing gratitude every day, and forgiveness is one of the key factor for the spirituality. If you want to give 5 things to our viewers, the person who are listening you, that everyone should do every day, what are those 5 things? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Well, I think first and foremost, take some time to go within. Many people can achieve this through centering prayer and other modes of kind of meditation. Just walking in nature works for many of us. I know I've used just a walk in nature, just appreciating a gorgeous sunset, having gratitude for the beauty in our life. And you know, the thing is, that also includes those hardships, the rough edges, the things that might not be so beautiful, coming to see how they contribute to our ability to appreciate our relationship with the universe and to help better foster love and kindness, compassion for ourselves and for others. So taking some time to go within. Meditation for me is indispensable. I meditate an hour or 2 a day. I've been doing that for at least the last decade or so. For those who would need a tool to kind of help them get deeply involved in meditation, Sacred Acoustics, you can learn a lot more at Karen's website, but there are many different forms of meditation. I think the important thing to remember about meditation is it's about acknowledging that little ego voice, so many of us identify with that running stream of thoughts in our head. I love how Michael Singer, in his book, The Untethered Soul, he calls that running stream of thoughts the annoying roommate. And that is exactly what it is. And so one of the first things I'll do in meditation is I'll let that ego voice, that linguistic voice in my head, it can state a request, ask a question, or state an intention. But then my linguistic brain goes into time out. It's one of the greatest gifts of meditation, is you quickly realize that voice in your head is little more than a parlor trick. There's really about that much brain that's involved in generating that, but we call it the dominant hemisphere because that's where that little linguistic brain lives. But ego and that voice can get you into deep trouble. And that's why, for example, in addiction and alcoholism work, often you have to have a ritual sacrifice of the ego just to let the healthier kind of higher self, higher soul emerge from that process. And I've spent a lot of time, especially in the last decade, also working in that kind of addiction and alcoholism field. And addictions can wreck our lives from many directions, not just substances. But people can be addicted to love, to sex, to exercise, to work. Many things can kind of wreck our lives. And meditation helps us to balance, to get back into that kind of sense of oneness with the universe. So I think taking some time in meditation is important. I also think that appreciating gratitude at every step in all of our interactions with others, and really take that higher soul perspective that starts to evolve. I found with my own meditative history, the more I meditated, the more my kind of daily mindset seemed to change in a very favorable fashion. I know from some of my work, for example, I had my EEG repeated at the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, and they found that I was living mainly in theta, just a very strong background of theta. And those of you who follow all this will realize theta is where most children spend most of their time. I guess that goes along with the fact that my diagnosis was E. coli meningitis. If you do a literature search, E. coli meningitis almost always happens in newborns. It's very rare beyond the age of 3 months. That was a big mystery to my doctors, but I think the universe has a great sense of humor, and part of the message to me was kind of the childish nature that was to be re-enlivened by my experience and my understanding, and that is a gift. Embrace that inner child that you harbor, that child that has wonder and love and a sense of curiosity about everything in the universe. That's a tremendous gift that we should never lose. And as adults, of course, we get kind of buried in our work and social situations and all this, and we tend to lose sight of that beautiful joy of discovery and curiosity. It's something we can use not only in meditation, but as our mind changes through ongoing practice of meditation, our ability to experience and interact in a loving and willful fashion with all the world around us greatly improves. I would encourage people to read and learn. This is all good for creativity, this kind of deeper understanding of the power of will, the power of mind. All can be enhanced through meditation as well as through studying these books on consciousness and coming to a deeper understanding of how it all works. It's a very rich way to spend your life. And the good news is a lot of this is available for free on the internet. I know if people go to ebenalexander.com, to my website, I have a recommended reading list there under one of the tabs, about, I think it is, and then reading. And if you go into that, you'll find more than 100 references. Many of them are live links to papers, some of the scientific papers, and a lot of information to books. It's all categorized. Yes, there's the page right there. Highly recommend that. Karen and I have been very busy during the pandemic. We realized that our sessions with colleagues around the world were coming to an end because of the pandemic. In addition to her offering that whole mind bundle to the world, Karen and I also started a webinar, and I would highly recommend people go to this webinar because it's another rich source of information, of interviews, of understanding, all for free. If you go to unitedinhopeandhealing.com, unitedinhopeandhealing.com. There's several ways there to interact with us. The one that we've taken a summer break from is a whole series of interviews that we did with many of our colleagues in this field, many of the scientists who work in the consciousness studies, many experiencers, people who study shared death, all the different varieties of this. And so there are a bunch of videos available for free at unitedinhopeandhealing.com. And of course, the links on that webpage you just showed, my reading list, and also my blog postings. Now, admittedly, I've been out of it on my blogs for the year and a half, mainly because of our work with that United in Hope and Healing webinar series. But I'm going to get started again here as the world comes back online with more blog postings to help people along in this kind of understanding. So if people just follow ebenalexander.com, get on that reading list. There's also a 33-day journey available when you first land on my website. Again, free. It's a community of more than 10,000 people that have formed over the last 3 years since Living in a Mindful Universe came out. And that 33-day journey is a 33-day drip email campaign where each day we give you one of the main topics from Living in a Mindful Universe. And the good news is people from all over the world have left their own experiences and helped each other. So we formed a big community there where you can participate with that community on the 33-day journey. So these are all ways that people can get involved. Most of them completely free options that I think can greatly enhance one's spiritual journey. And I just encourage people to keep in touch through that ebenalexander.com, also sacredacoustics.com. Karen has done a wonderful job of putting some teaching videos. There's also a Sacred Acoustics app that works for the most part on iPhones, although there's a version available also on Android devices. But the updating of that is a little bit behind compared to the iPhone. But there are many different ways that people can participate in this grand awakening of humanity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eben.
Thank you.
I was pondering on one statement: universe is experiencing itself through you. It's the indirect statement of oneness consciousness. So kindly, can you share some light on this?
Absolutely. This is one of the greatest gifts of it all. You know, there was much confusion in the mid and late 20th century in neuroscience and philosophy of mind about consciousness. And although the quantum physicists were smart enough to realize that consciousness was something fundamental and not derivative from matter, like from the brain, you know, many of us in health science and all that kind of missed it for such a long time. But the deep truth that they were speaking is what I believe is the inevitable truth of all this. That mental layer of the universe pre-exists the Big Bang. It is the kind of timeless, eternal, and infinite ground out of which all being arises. This is that deep and profound truth that many spiritual leaders came to realize thousands of years ago. And certainly India has its own rich kind of connection with that history. But in many ways, the modern science is proving this. Quantum physics suggesting this oneness of mind. And when we realize that our consciousness continues not only beyond death, but that reincarnation is an absolutely real part of this process, even though, remember, there is programmed forgetting. Those who study past life memories in children tell you if you don't harvest those memories by age 5 or 6, you might never be able to get them. Although later work, like with transpersonal psychology and hypnosis, shows those memories can resurface. And likewise, meditation. I've had many past life experiences of my own come up in meditation, what I believe to be past life experiences. But ultimately, what this is showing us is that sense of awareness, of existence, is a fundamental property of the universe itself. It is something the brain filters in, but does not generate or produce. And it is very comforting to realize that our kind of sense of being is something that aligns deeply, not only with the existence of the universe, but with its very purpose for existence. And that I believe in many ways Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who wrote that beautiful book, The Phenomenon of Man, in the mid-1950s. That book, in which he basically saw that evolution was much bigger than that puny little biological Darwinian evolution that was currently discussed in science. But he saw all of consciousness evolving. And in many ways, I believe we are all part of that. Just like that old saying, all consciousness is local, I would say all evolution of consciousness throughout the universe, which is the reason the whole thing exists, is nothing more than the experience of sentient beings coming to a deeper understanding of their own relationship with the greater whole. The universe is conscious of itself, and that's what our sentience is part of. And we can use that in discerning information and also in influencing our evolving reality. Our free will, from that higher perspective of higher soul, not from the perspective of the ego, which can have a very frustrated sense of will, but from the perspective of this higher soul that is the true manifestation of the awareness of the universe. That's where we gain tremendous power to bring love, peace, prosperity, and harmony to all.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And this topic is so huge. We can talk for hours and hours. The consciousness is infinite.
Well,
Thank you, Dr. Alexander.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure being with you, and I hope this has helped your audience. I hope they'll keep in touch with me through EbenAlexander.com and through SacredAcoustics.com about the meditation. And I want to thank you for all the work you do to help get this out to the world, certainly to help in our healing and to get this out to those interested in the healing arts, to bring this kind of healing to the world at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Alexander. Dr. Alexander, few of our viewers are sending one request to us. We just want to extend. You can accept or we can discuss about later. It depends on time. On the 22nd of May 2022, we're going to celebrate our second anniversary of our project, Spiritual Doctor Holistic Health. And everyone wants that to invite you in advance so that you can grace that occasion.
Well, that sounds excellent. If you could send that invitation to admin, ADMIN, at EbenAlexander.com, and that'll be a good way for me to kind of interact and hopefully participate.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed, this was a really, really wonderful and insightful session, Dr. Alexander.
Thank you very much.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you.